The cabin stood alone at the far edge of the frontier, swallowed by snow and silence, as if the world had deliberately forgotten it. No road led cleanly to its door, only a narrow, broken trail buried under white frost. Inside that fragile wooden shelter, Miriam lay wrapped in thin blankets that could no longer fight the cold. Every breath felt heavier than the last. She had stopped counting days. Now she counted heartbeats. The town miles away had already decided her fate without ever saying it aloud. When she fell sick, no neighbor knocked, no church bell rang, no hand reached out. People had learned how to look away, and she had learned how to endure it. The fire in the small stove flickered weakly, threatening to die at any moment. Shadows danced along the cracked walls, reminding her of nights when fear felt louder than pain. She remembered the rumors, how people said she carried bad luck, how tragedy seemed to follow her name. Over time, those whispers became walls, pushing her farther and farther from human warmth, until this cabin was all she had left, lying there staring at the low wooden ceiling. Miriam wondered if this was how life ended, not with drama, but with quiet abandonment. Outside, the wind howled across the valley, bending trees and erasing tracks. That same night, rancher Ethan was riding home after a long day, his coat pulled tight against the cold. He knew these lands well, yet something about the stillness unsettled him. As he passed the edge of the valley, a faint glow caught his eye, barely visible but real. Smoke rose thinly into the dark sky from the forgotten cabin. He slowed his horse. Everyone knew who lived there. Everyone knew to stay away. Ethan hesitated. The town had its reasons, or at least excuses. Getting involved meant questions, judgment, and whispers that never truly stopped. He told himself someone else would check. He told himself it wasn't his responsibility. Yet as he turned slightly away, the wind carried a sound. Soft, broken, almost lost. A human voice. His chest tightened. He dismounted and walked toward the cabin, boots crunching through snow that seemed deeper with every step. With each pace, doubt fought against instinct. By the time he reached the door, his fingers were numb, but his resolve was clear. He placed his hand on the rough wood, feeling the cold seep into his skin. Inside, a fragile cough echoed, followed by silence. Ethan understood then that this moment mattered. If he walked away, the cabin would soon return to complete darkness, and the town would never speak of it again. He took a breath, pushed the door open, and stepped inside, unknowingly, crossing a line that would change not only one woman's fate, but his own, and eventually the conscience of an entire town. The door creaked as Ethan pushed it open, and a wave of cold, stale air met him. The cabin was smaller than he imagined, its walls darkened by years of smoke and loneliness. The fire in the stove was barely alive, its faint glow casting trembling shadows across the room. On a narrow bed near the wall lay Miriam, her body frail, her breathing shallow and uneven. For a moment, Ethan simply stood there, struck by how quiet suffering could be. Her eyes slowly opened at the sound of his footsteps. When she recognized that someone was standing there, surprise flickered across her face, quickly followed by disbelief. She tried to sit up but failed, her strength long gone. Ethan moved closer at once, setting aside his hesitation. He knelt beside the bed, noticing how thin her hands were, how cold the room felt even with the fire burning. She studied his face as if afraid he might vanish. "I thought no one would come," she whispered, her voice barely stronger than the wind outside. The words were not spoken with anger, only tired acceptance. They struck Ethan harder than any accusation ever could. He swallowed, unsure of what to say, then quietly replied that he was there now. It felt like an inadequate answer, but it was the truth. Ethan set to work without thinking. He added wood to the stove, coaxing the flames back to life, then poured water into a small pot to warm it. He removed his heavy coat and draped it gently over Miriam's shoulders. She protested weakly, but he shook his head, telling her she needed it more than he did. The warmth brought a faint color back to her face, and for the first time that night her breathing eased. Hours passed slowly. Outside, the storm pressed against the cabin, but inside, time seemed suspended. Miriam spoke in broken sentences, pausing often to catch her breath. She told him about the town, about how quickly people stopped seeing her as human once misfortune touched her life. She spoke of friendships that faded, doors that closed, and how silence became her closest companion. Ethan listened, his jaw tight, realizing how easy it had been for everyone, including himself, to pretend she did not exist. As the night deepened, exhaustion overtook Miriam. She drifted in and out of sleep, her hand instinctively gripping Ethan's sleeve whenever she woke, as if afraid he would leave. Each time he stayed, he refilled the fire, wiped her brow, and whispered that she was not alone. The words felt unfamiliar yet necessary. When dawn finally crept through the cracked window, pale and cold, Ethan had made a decision he had not planned. He would return. This would not be a single act of kindness to ease his conscience. As he watched Miriam sleep, fragile but still alive, he understood that walking away now would be another form of cruelty. The town might talk, judge, or turn its back on him as it had on her. But for the first time, Ethan was certain that some choices mattered more than reputation. Morning light slowly filled the cabin, revealing just how harsh the night had been. The fire had burned low again, and frost clung to the edges of the small window. Miriam stirred weakly, surprised to find Ethan still there. For a brief moment, she wondered if his presence had been a dream, but the warmth in the room and the steady sound of his breathing told her otherwise. Ethan rose quietly and added more wood to the stove, moving with the calm certainty of someone who had already decided this was where he needed to be. Over the next few days, his visits became routine. He arrived each morning with food, medicine, and clean water, and left only when night forced him back to his ranch. Each time he returned, Miriam seemed a little stronger, as if the simple knowledge that someone cared was helping her fight. They spoke more freely now. She laughed softly at memories she had long buried, and Ethan found himself sharing parts of his own life, long days of labor, empty evenings, and the quiet loneliness that came with living far from people. Word spread quickly through the town. People noticed Ethan's absence, his repeated rides toward the forgotten valley. Whispers followed him when he appeared in public. Some shook their heads, warning him that helping Miriam would bring trouble. Others watched in silence, uncomfortable with what his actions revealed about their own choices. Ethan heard the rumors but refused to respond. Every warning only strengthened his resolve. One afternoon, as he entered the cabin, he found Miriam struggling to stand. Her legs trembled, and fear flashed in her eyes. It was clear she could no longer survive alone in that place. The realization settled heavily on Ethan's chest. The cabin, once her only refuge, had become a prison. If she stayed, she would not last much longer, no matter how often he returned. That evening, Ethan made a decision that would shock the entire town. He told Miriam he was taking her to his ranch. At first, she thought she had misunderstood him. No one had ever offered her a place among others before. Tears welled in her eyes as she asked if he was sure. Ethan answered by packing her few belongings and wrapping her carefully in warm blankets. The next morning, he helped her onto a wagon and guided the horse onto the main road. As they passed through town, conversation stopped. Doors opened, faces appeared at windows, and disbelief spread like wildfire. The woman who had been quietly erased was now moving through the streets with dignity, supported by the very man people respected most. Miriam kept her eyes lowered, overwhelmed by the stares, but Ethan rode beside her without hesitation. He did not rush, nor did he hide. With every step forward, the town was forced to confront what it had done and what one man was now undoing. By the time they reached the ranch, the whispers had turned into something else entirely. Shame, mixed with the first stirrings of respect. The ranch felt different from the moment Miriam arrived, as if her presence had quietly changed the air itself. Ethan prepared a small room near the fireplace, warm and clean, a place where sunlight reached the floor each morning. For someone who had spent months in isolation, the simple comforts felt unreal. Miriam moved slowly, still weak, but her eyes softened as she took in the sounds of life. Around her, the distant lowing of cattle, the creak of wooden floors, the steady rhythm of another human being nearby. Days passed with a gentle routine. Ethan made sure she ate, rested, and took her medicine. He spoke to her as an equal, never with pity, and that respect mattered more than anything else. Miriam's strength did not fully return, but her spirit did. She smiled more often, asked about the land, and sometimes sat by the window, watching the open fields with quiet gratitude. For the first time in years, fear loosened its grip on her heart. The town could not ignore what was happening. At first, people kept their distance, unsure how to face the consequences of their silence. Then, slowly, they began to come. One neighbor arrived with fresh bread, another with flowers. Each visit filled with awkward apologies and lowered eyes. Miriam welcomed them without bitterness. She listened, nodded, and forgave in a way that made many of them uncomfortable. Her kindness forced them to see how easily they had turned away from someone who needed them. When Miriam's final days approached, the ranch no longer felt like a place of sorrow. It became a place of reflection. People gathered quietly, speaking in hushed voices, offering prayers and comfort. Miriam was no longer alone. Ethan stayed by her side through every moment, holding her hand when words were no longer necessary. In her final hours, she looked at him with peace in her eyes and whispered thanks, not for saving her life, but for giving her dignity at the end of it. After she passed, a deep stillness settled over the ranch and the town beyond it. The funeral brought together people who had once crossed the street to avoid her. Tears were shed not only for Miriam, but for the truth her story revealed. The cabin in the valley was left to decay, a silent reminder of what neglect looked like, while the ranch stood as proof of what compassion could do. Ethan never spoke of his actions as heroic. When asked, he simply said he did what felt right. Yet the town was changed forever. People became quicker to notice suffering, slower to judge, and more willing to act. Long after Miriam was gone, her story lived on, not as a tale of dying alone, but as a lesson in how one choice, made in kindness, could awaken the humanity of an entire community.